The night watch at Kessaldivar Transit Annex 7 was not a complicated job. You walked the corridor at the top of every hour. You checked the atmospheric relay at 1/2 past. You made tea when you wanted it, which was usually twice before the storm corridor opened at dawn and the transit traffic resumed. If a shuttle came in late, you logged the manifest and pointed the passengers toward the transit dormitory. If the environmental unit on the east wall began its low harmonic, the one that meant the heating element was cycling down rather than cycling through, you went and adjusted the dial by a quarter turn and it stopped. If no shuttle came in late and the environmental unit behaved itself, you walked the corridor, read, drank your tea, and watched the corridor weather projection update itself on the north wall terminal every 40 minutes. I had been doing it for 3 years. Before that, 12 years at the outer compact corridor posts, maintenance and supply, which is where you learn that most of what happens at night is either nothing or something very small that becomes a problem only if you ignore it. You do not ignore small things at the outer posts. The outer posts teach you that small things are the only things that have time to become large ones. A pressure valve that cycles a quarter turn low, a relay contact that reads clean on Monday and corroded by Thursday, a welfare provision that appears irrelevant until the specific set of circumstances that makes it relevant arrives at 2112 on a delayed corridor night. The outer posts teach you to read the provisions before you need them, to adjust the dial before the harmonic starts, to sit down and understand the tool before the task is in front of you. I had left the outer posts because I had done 12 years of them, and I had found that 3 years of a transit annex night watch suited me well. Kessaldivar Transit Annex 7 was a modest station, 14 transit bays, a waiting annex that could accommodate 60 passengers in comfort and 80 in a delay, a dormitory wing with 30 cots, a dispensary unit, and the keeper's room at the junction of the north and east corridors. The building was stone and prefab steel, the way all the early corridor stations were built, before the compact settled on the standardized port construction that came later. The stone held the cold well and the heat poorly, which meant the floor heater in the keeper's room had to run all night on medium to keep the junction from dropping to the temperature of the corridor, and the atmospheric relay required manual calibration every 3 days because the stone walls conducted the external temperature fluctuations into the relay housing in a way the automated calibration system had not been designed to compensate for. These were small things. I had learned them in the first month, and they had not troubled me since. The corridor delay had been running since early afternoon. A pressure storm in the middle transit band, the kind that stacks up behind the third moon's shadow and sits there for 6 to 8 hours while the corridor authority runs its recalculation, and the transit vessels queue in the parking field, and the passengers find seats in the waiting annex and eat from the dispensary and wait. I was accustomed to corridor delays. They were the texture of the job. You kept the waiting annex warm, you kept the dispensary stocked, you made sure the dormitory cots had their blankets turned back, and you walked the corridor at the top of every hour. The diplomatic transit group had come in on the second shuttle, mid-afternoon. I had logged the manifest at the intake desk, 14 passengers under compact transit authority, one flagged as a senior diplomatic party requiring the priority transit lane. The flag was for a Velsorin House delegate. I noted the house designation and the transit code, logged them to the station record, and directed the group to the priority waiting area in the East Annex. They filed past the desk in the orderly way of people who had traveled long enough to know how to wait. Standard diplomatic transit group, several aides in formal coats, 2 security contractors in field weight transit gear, an administrative specialist with a data pad already open. I noted them and directed them. Near the back of the group, close to a tall woman in a formal gray diplomatic coat, were 2 small figures. The woman had the silver pale hair and the deep ash-silver skin that marked Velsorin primary line, and she was speaking quietly to a younger aide, while the two small ones tracked everything with the large, precise eyes of children who are cataloging a new environment. The older one was perhaps 10, ash-silver skin, double iris amber eyes, a small notebook already in one hand with the grip of someone who keeps it close by habit. The younger one was smaller, perhaps 6, mint silver skin, a slightly different shade, the eyes a cooler pale version of the same double iris structure, a cloth bag pressed to her chest with both arms in the way of a child who carries one thing everywhere. Both of them looked at the intake desk when they passed it. The older one's eyes went to the relay terminal, the welfare manual on the shelf, the corridor. The younger one's eyes went to the floor heater at the corner of the room, visible through the open door of the keeper's room, and stayed there for a moment before moving on. I noted them the way you note everything at an intake desk, logged and filed. That was at 2:30 in the afternoon. By the time my evening shift started at 7, the corridor was still closed, and the weather projection had extended the delay to dawn. I walked the East Annex at 7:15 and found the diplomatic group settled, the senior delegate and her aides at the priority seating near the east window, several of the group at the dispensary. The two small ones were at the far end of the priority seating, the older one working through something in her notebook with a precise, methodical hand, the younger one sitting cross-legged on the seat beside her with the cloth bag in her lap, watching the atmospheric display on the east wall. I walked the full corridor, checked the relay, went back to the keeper's room, made tea. The keeper's room was at the junction of the north and east corridors. A practical room, not large, with the relay terminal on the north wall, a work table, 2 supply cabinets, a floor heater in the corner that I kept running at medium throughout the night shift, because the stone corridors of Transit Annex 7 pulled the heat out of any space if you did not stay ahead of it. There were 2 spare cots folded against the west wall, standard equipment for a keeper's room at a transit post. You kept them in case a passenger was taken ill or a crew member needed to rest during a long delay. I had used them perhaps 4 times in 3 years. I kept a blanket folded on each because that is what you do. The door I left open a hand's width, because the corridor alerts came through the speaker at the desk, and the speaker at the desk was calibrated for a room with an open door. At 9, I walked the annex again. The diplomatic group was quieter. Several had moved to the dormitory for the delay. The senior delegate was at the priority seating with a single aide, working from a data pad. The 2 small ones were not visible in the annex. I looked through the corridor toward the dormitory wing and did not see them there either. I assumed they had been taken to one of the private dormitory rooms, which had their own door access and would not be visible from the main corridor. I noted the absence, filed it under settled for the night, and went on with the hours round. At 10, I walked the corridor, checked the relay, noted that the atmospheric projection had bumped the corridor clearing to 5:30 at the earliest. I went back to the keeper's room. The door was still ajar. I pushed it open further, the way I always did on the return from the corridor round, to let the corridor air exchange with the room air for a few minutes before I settled in for the reading hour. They were on the floor between the supply cabinet and the floor heater, on the section of corridor mat that the heater kept warmest. The older one was curled on her side with her notebook under her head as a pillow, her cloth bag pulled up against her chest. The younger one was fitted against her back, face tucked in, the older one's free arm resting over her in the automatic way of a child who has done this many times, the arm placed without waking, by the same reflex that keeps a person from falling out of a familiar bed in the dark. They were both deeply asleep. The older one's ash-silver hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been in and spread across the mat in a wide, pale fan. The younger one's mint-silver skin caught the heater's light and turned it a warm gold at the edges, the particular gold that Kessaldivar's secondary moon produces when its light comes through the east corridor window in the early evening, before the corridor weather closes over. I stood in the doorway for a long moment and did not move. I had found children asleep in transit annexes before, in 12 years at the outer posts. It happened on long delays. A child falls asleep in the waiting area, gets moved by a parent who doesn't want to wake them, ends up on a cot in the corner of a supply room. It was not unusual. What was different here was that the keeper's room was not a supply room. It was not the dormitory, and the door had been ajar. They had come through an open door that they did not have to come through. In a transit annex they had been in for 7 hours, and they had found the warmest patch of floor in the building and gone to sleep on it. I thought about that for a moment. Then I thought about where their mother was, and what a Velkith secondary holdings coordinator would make of 2 unaccompanied Velsoran minors found in a night watch keeper's room during an extended corridor delay. I stepped in carefully, moved my chair so that it was between the door and them, not blocking the heater, not too close, just placed so that anyone coming through the door would encounter the chair and me before they encountered the floor. I sat down. The welfare manual was on the work table. I picked it up, turned to the index, found Article 14, Unaccompanied Minors in Transit Custody, and began reading from the beginning. I was a registered compact welfare contact for Transit Annex 7. It was in the station registry, had been for 3 years, was a standard qualification for any transit facility of this size and category. I had filed the registration when I took the position because it was listed in the position requirements, and I had read the requirements before accepting. I had not, in 3 years of night watch, needed to use it as more than a procedural designation. I wanted to understand exactly what it allowed me to do, and in exactly what order I needed to do it, because the time to understand a tool is before you need it, not while you are already using it. I read Article 14 from the first paragraph through the end of subsection 5. Then I went back and read subsections 3 and 4 again, more slowly. I was at subsection 9, paragraph 3, the record-keeping requirements for overnight welfare custody, when I heard the footsteps in the corridor. He appeared in the doorway at 2214. Compact Transit Registry, a Velkith secondary holdings coordinator, from the house designation on his transit coat, with a single administrative specialist behind him. He was holding a data pad in both hands with the particular posture of someone who is carrying something he expects to be handed over. His expression was the expression of a man who has a correct procedure and has come to execute it. He looked at the 2 small ones on the floor. He looked at me. I looked at him and waited. "The 2 minors," he said, keeping his voice low for the corridor, but just barely. "They are registered as unaccompanied in transit custody under the corridor delay protocol. The temporary wardship instrument has a 48-hour filing window from the time of registration," I said. Article 14, subsection 4, paragraph 1. He paused. The registration was filed at 2112. "I know when it was filed," I said. "I received the automated notification at 2114. I set the welfare manual on the work table and picked up the relay terminal's secondary screen, which I had positioned on the armrest of the chair 20 minutes earlier in anticipation of this conversation. I filed the counter-registration at 2122. Article 14, subsection 5, Established Compact Welfare Custodian Designation, supersedes temporary wardship instrument within the filing window." He looked at the terminal screen. He looked at me. "You are the night watch keeper." "I'm also a registered compact welfare contact for Transit Annex 7, which is documented in the station registry going back 3 years. I had confirmed this at 2118, which was 4 minutes after the automated notification and 4 minutes before I filed. Article 14, subsection 5, requires an established welfare contact at a compact registered facility. This is a compact registered facility. I am the established contact on record for the night shift. The counter-registration was accepted at 2144. I turned the terminal screen so he could see the confirmation number. He looked at it for a long moment. He was reading it carefully, the way you read something when you are looking for the point at which it becomes incorrect. He was not going to find that point, because I had read subsection 5 3 times and the confirmation number was a valid system-generated authorization code, but I did not say that. I let him read. The administrative specialist behind him was consulting her own data pad. She said something quiet to him in Velkith secondary dialect that I did not catch, but the cadence of it was confirmation rather than instruction, the sound of someone who has just checked the same reference and found the same answer. The temporary wardship instrument, he began again, is superseded, I said, still keeping my voice at the level of the room low enough not to disturb the sleep behind me. The filing window is 48 hours from registration, but the counter-registration under subsection 5 takes precedence if filed before the wardship instrument is presented to the facility contact. You are presenting it now. I filed at 2122. The precedence is established. I paused. If you have questions about the legal standing of the counter-registration, Article 14 subsection 5, Paragraph 4 contains the full precedence framework. The welfare manual is on the table. He did not reach for the manual. Behind me on the floor, one of the small ones shifted slightly, a soft sound, a small adjustment settling deeper. Neither woke. The coordinator looked at the floor. He looked at the two small forms with their ash silver and mint silver hair spread across the corridor mat in the heater's glow. He looked at me. He had the expression of a man who had arrived with the expectation of a simple administrative transfer and had found something that was going to require more documentation than he had brought with him. The diplomatic party, he said, the senior delegate, has been notified through the station relay system, I said. I sent the notification at 2126, 4 minutes after the counter-registration was submitted. I informed her of the location of her daughters, their condition, asleep, undisturbed, and the counter-registration status. I received her acknowledgement at 2139. I tapped the relay terminal. If you need to see the acknowledgement, it is in the station log. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he looked at his administrative specialist. She shook her head, a small, precise movement. He left. The administrative specialist followed him. I heard their footsteps going back down the corridor toward the East Annex, unhurried but purposeful, the sound of people who have not given up, only paused. I turned the terminal screen back to face me. I went back to Article 14, subsection 9, Paragraph 3, which was where I had been when they arrived. It concerned the transfer of welfare custodian designation at the end of a delay period, which was going to be relevant in the morning. I read it twice, and then I read the subsection following it, which concerned the record-keeping requirements for overnight welfare custody at a compact registered facility. I made a note on the station log of the coordinator's visit, the time, the instrument presented, and the counterposition cited. Then I made tea and went back to reading. The heater cycled. The corridor outside was quiet in the way a transit annex gets quiet in the deep middle hours of a delay, not empty, just still. Everyone who was going to sleep having found their cot, everyone who was going to wait having settled into the waiting. At midnight I walked the full corridor, the East Annex, the West Approach, the North Junction, the dormitory wing. I stopped at the keeper's room door on my way back and looked in. They were exactly as I had left them, except that the younger one had shifted slightly and was now facing the other direction, her back against the supply cabinet, the older one's arm still across her by some sleeping reflex that had survived the shift. The cloth bag was between them now, half under the older one's arm. The heater was maintaining the temperature well. I stood for a moment and checked. The corridor mat was undisturbed. The blankets on the spare cots were where I had left them. The door was still at the right angle to catch corridor noise. I went and made tea and came back and sat in the chair and read the appendix to Article 14, which was 8 pages and covered the specific provisions for extended delay situations, which this now was. The older one woke at 2:30. I heard it before I saw it, a change in the quality of the breathing, the particular shift from deep sleep rhythm to the lighter cycling of a child surfacing. Then the small sound of a child coming awake in an unfamiliar place and taking the measure of it before she moved. I stayed still in the chair. I did not turn on the worktable light. She lay there for a moment without moving. Then, carefully, she lifted herself up on one arm and looked around the room. Her eyes went to the relay terminal on the north wall, the supply cabinets, the work table with the welfare manual and the teacup and the terminal screen. Then they went to the spare cots, still folded against the west wall with their blankets. Then they came to me. I said in the quiet tone you use in a room where someone is still sleeping, "The heater is on. You are safe." She considered me for a moment. The double iris structure of her eyes caught the heater's glow and gave them a depth that was unusual, pale amber at the surface, a warmer amber underneath. The two registers of light sitting behind each other the way a deep pool looks when the sun is at the right angle. She had her notebook in her hand already. She had been holding it even in sleep, which told me something about the notebook that I filed away without comment. "You are the station keeper," she said. Her compact standard was precise and careful, the kind of careful that means you have studied a language rather than absorbed it in childhood. Every word placed with attention to its position in the sentence. "Yes," I said. "We came here," she said, not an apology and not an explanation. A statement of fact that she was offering in case it was needed. "I know," I said. "The door was open." She looked at the door, which was still ajar at the same angle I had kept it all night. She looked at me. "You did not close it." "No," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "There was a man," she said. "He came at 22:14, I said. "He left." She absorbed this. Her gaze went to the relay terminal, the confirmation number still visible on the screen, then back to me. "You filed something." "Yes." "Before he came." "Yes," I said, "at 2122. She looked at me with the expression of a child who is calculating something, and finding that the numbers resolve in a direction she had not been certain they would resolve. "You knew," she said. "I read the provisions," I said. "When I found you here, I sat down and read them. The protocol for unaccompanied minors in transit custody during corridor delays is Article 14. I read Article 14. She looked at the welfare manual on the work table. Its cover was worn. I had owned it since the outer post years, read it through twice in training and referred to it many times since. She looked at me. "You did not already know it." "I knew most of it," I said. "I wanted to make sure about the specific provisions. The specific provisions matter." She said something in Old Velsoran, very quiet, not directed at me, but at some internal accounting she was completing. I did not have the old dialect. I had trained Velsoran enough for intake work, not enough for the formal registers. But the sound of it was settled. Whatever she had added up had come out correctly. "You should sleep," I said. "The corridor does not clear until 5:30. There are still 3 hours. She looked at her sister, who had not stirred. She looked at the spare cots against the west wall. She looked at the floor where she was. "The floor is warmer," I said. "The cots are further from the heater." She considered this with the methodical seriousness of a 10-year-old who does not make decisions carelessly. She looked at the section of mat between herself and the heater, gauging the distance with the same kind of spatial attention I had noticed at the intake desk. She looked at the blankets on the spare cots. She looked at me. "Could I have one of the blankets?" she said. "Yes," I said. I stood, took one from the nearer cot and brought it to her. I did not unfold it for her. She was 10 years old and she knew how a blanket worked. I held it out and she took it. She arranged it over her sister first, then settled the other half over herself. She lay back down. She repositioned the notebook under her head. She put her free arm back over her sister without being asked. In approximately 4 minutes, she was asleep again. I went back to the chair and the terminal. I updated the station log with the midnight round, the 2:30 waking, the blanket provision. I noted the times and the conditions. Then I went back to Article 14 Appendix, Section 3. The coordinator came back at 4:41. This time he had a second administrative specialist, a different one from the first, with a different data pad and a printed instrument rather than a digital one, which meant he had spent the interval finding a provision that he believed required a physical document under the bilateral treaty protocols. I respected the effort. He had done his research. The instrument cited Article 14 subsection 6, the temporary wardship provision under extended delay protocol, which applied when a corridor delay extended past 12 hours and the registered welfare contact had not been replaced by a primary guardian. He said it quietly, because the door was open and the small ones were on the floor inside, and whatever else he was a man who kept his voice down in a room where children were sleeping. The delay has extended past 12 hours, he said, under subsection 6. Subsection 6 applies when the registered welfare contact has not been replaced by a primary guardian, I said. Subsection 5, paragraph 2, I sent you this in the relay at 2:47 this morning, which I note you have not acknowledged, requires the presenting party to demonstrate that no primary guardian contact has been established within the delay period. I had the relay terminal in my hand. The senior delegate sent a relay at 2304 designating me as acting welfare contact with full primary guardian co-authority under Article 14 subsection 8, paragraph 1. He looked at the terminal. That is a primary guardian delegation, I said. Subsection 6 does not apply when a primary guardian delegation is on file. The delegation is in the station record and was copied to the Corridor Authority Welfare Board as a matter of protocol at 2306. I can print it if you need it. The second administrative specialist was already reading from her data pad. She said something to him, quiet and flat, that had the sound of confirmation of something he had not wanted confirmed. Her expression was the expression of a specialist who is good at her job and who is, at this moment, doing her job by telling the person who engaged her that a particular approach is not going to work. He looked at the room, the floor, the two small ones under the blanket, the heater, me in the chair with the relay terminal. He looked at me the way a man looks at something that has been correctly done before he arrived and will remain correctly done after he leaves. The delegation was made under duress, he said. The senior delegate was in an unfamiliar station during an extended delay. Was in the priority waiting area in the East Annex with access to her full diplomatic communication suite, I said. The relay was sent from her registered diplomatic transit account with a 9-digit authentication string that requires the account holder's personal authorization key. The Corridor Authority's Welfare Board has a formal process for duress claims. It is a separate filing with a minimum review period of 6 days. I paused. I can give you the Welfare Board's relay address. He did not want the relay address. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, looking at the room. Then he left. The second administrative specialist followed. I heard their footsteps going down the corridor, deliberate still, not defeated, but moving in the direction of a different calculation. I updated the station log with the 4:41 visit. I noted the provision cited, the counterposition, the time. I made tea. I sat in the chair and watched the north wall terminal update the corridor clearing projection. 5:32, revised from 5:30. The atmospheric pressure in the transit band was dropping at the expected rate. The storm was done. The corridor was going to clear. At 5:03, the younger one woke. She woke differently from her sister all at once, sitting up with the cloth bag already in her arms, looking around the room with the rapid inventory of a child who falls asleep in one place and checks immediately whether she has been moved. Her ice-pale double-iris eyes went around the room in a full circuit and came to me. I said in the same quiet tone, "The heater is on. You are safe." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at her sister, still asleep, then at the blanket across both of them. Then at the cloth bag in her arms, then back at me. "You are the keeper," she said. Her compact standard was less formal than her sister's and more fluent, the kind of fluency that comes from having learned a language young enough that it settled in the bones before the grammar was consciously studied. "Yes," I said. "Someone came," she said. "Twice," I said. "Twice," she repeated. She absorbed this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old who is being given information and intends to store it accurately. "Did they take anything?" "No," I said. She looked at the door, still ajar at the same angle it had been all night. She looked at the terminal screen. She looked at me with the expression of someone performing a final verification of a set of facts she has been holding in reserve. Then she reached into the cloth bag and took out a small stone, pale gray, smooth, fitting her small palm exactly, and held it out toward me. I looked at it. "It is from the second moon," she said. "Kessaldivar secondary. We landed on the secondary pad on the inbound run. The geology there is different from the primary." She said this with the tone of someone sharing a fact they consider important and have identified the right moment to share. "You can see the silicate content in the color if the light is right." I reached out and took the stone. It was cool and smooth, heavier than it appeared, the specific density of mineral-rich geology, the weight distributed evenly through the grain. I turned it over. There was a white vein through the gray, very fine and very straight, as if someone had drawn it with a clean instrument. "Quartz," I said. She nodded, a single precise movement. "The secondary moon has more silicate deposits than the primary. The vein structure is the indicator." She looked at the stone in my hand. "You can keep it," she said. "I have the geological record in my notebook. Sale helped me with the notation system." I looked at the stone. I looked at her. She was watching me with the expression of a child who has made a deliberate decision and is waiting to see whether the recipient understands the weight of it. "Thank you," I said. She nodded again. She settled back against the supply cabinet with the cloth bag in her lap and began going through its contents with the quiet, systematic attention of someone running inventory after a night in an uncertain location. After a moment she looked up and said, without prelude, "There is a word in Old Velsoran." "I don't have the old dialect," I said. "It does not have a compact equivalent," she said. "It is Velsathos." She said it carefully, giving each syllable its weight. "It means the keeper of the door who does not close it." She paused, working through the construction. "Sale says there is no compact word for that because compact stations have regulations about night shift door security, but the thing the word describes exists everywhere." She examined the cloth bag. "It just does not always have a name." I held the stone in my hand. The heater ran its slow, patient cycle. Down the corridor, the dispensary unit completed its morning startup sequence with the soft chime that marked the beginning of the first shift. "Is it a common word?" I said. "Velsathos." She considered. "Sale says it is in the older registers, the ones from before the corridor treaties." She straightened the cloth bag. "She says it is in the word for what a house is, not the building, the thing the building holds." She looked at me. "She knows more of the old dialect than I do, but I know that word." At 5:21, the older one woke. She sat up with the notebook already in hand, took in the room, looked at her sister. "You are awake," she said in Old Velsoran. The younger one said something brief that made the older one's expression shift into what I had come to understand over the last 7 hours was her version of settled reassurance, a particular stillness, the notebook not reaching for the page yet, which was its own form of attention. Then she looked at me. "The corridor," she said. "Projected to clear at 5:32, I said. 11 minutes, the storm is down." She nodded. She began rebraiding her hair with the quick practiced movements of someone who has done it in difficult conditions many times and has learned to do it correctly at speed. She looked at the stone in my hand. She looked at her sister. "She gave you the Kessaldivar secondary stone," she said. "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment, the braid moving under her hands without her needing to watch it. Then she said, "She does not give that to many people. Not a warning, an explanation of the weight of the thing I was holding." "I understand," I said. She looked at me for a long moment with those amber double-iris eyes, the inner ring catching the heater's light the way the stone caught it, the depth behind the surface. She was doing that calculation again, the one I had watched her do at 2:30, adding something up, finding that it resolved correctly. She said, "The man who came twice will file a third time." "He can," I said. "The primary guardian delegation is on record, and the welfare hold under Article 14 will remain in effect through the transit clearing and the departure. He does not have a provision that supersedes a delegation combined with an active welfare hold from a registered facility contact in an established compact station. The third attempt goes to the Corridor Authority Welfare Board for review. Minimum 6 days." I paused. "You will be through the corridor well before it is reviewed." She absorbed this with the same calculating stillness. Then she said, "You read the whole provision set." "The parts that were relevant," I said. "Article 14 is not long, 12 pages. The appendix is another 8. You read it last night. When you found us." "Yes." "You were already reading it when he came the first time." "Yes," I said. "Before you knew he was coming." "I knew someone was likely to come," I said. "The automated notification goes to any registered Velkith secondary holdings coordinator in the transit network when an unaccompanied minor registration is filed. I received the notification at 2114. I assumed someone would act on it." She looked at the welfare manual on the work table. She looked at me. She opened her notebook to a new page and wrote something down, 3 lines precise and close together. I did not ask what it was. That was her record, not mine. The corridor clearing came through at 5:31, 1 minute behind the revised projection, which was within normal tolerance. The transit relay in the East Annex chimed. I heard, a few seconds later, the sound of the annex coming awake in earnest voices, the dormitory wing stirring, the dispensary running its breakfast cycle. The two of them stood up from the floor. The younger one reorganized the contents of her cloth bag with practiced economy, the stone inventory going back in a specific order. The older one folded the blanket and set it on the cot, then straightened her clothing with the same quick precision she had used for her hair. They both looked at the room, the heater, the work table, the welfare manual, the spare cots, the door. "We should find our mother," the older one said. "Yes," I said. "The priority waiting area in the East Annex, if she has not already come toward the bay." I stood and moved to the door and held it open at the same angle it had been all night. The younger one went first, stopped in the doorway, looked up at me. "Velsathos," she said. "I don't have the old dialect," I said. "I know," she said, "but you have the stone." She went down the corridor. Her sister followed, pausing at the door long enough to look at me once more with those amber eyes, not a question, something more like the final notation in a document that has been carefully kept. Then she went after her sister. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The corridor was full of the sounds of transit resuming. I looked at the floor where they had been. The corridor mat still warm from the heater, the small impression where the notebook had made a pillow, the slight displacement of the mat's surface where 2 small bodies had spent the night in the warmest available patch of stone and prefab steel building on a corridor moon in the middle of a pressure storm. I looked at the stone in my hand. I put the stone on the work table next to the relay terminal. I went and walked the corridor. She was at the North Junction when I came around the East Passage. The senior delegate, in her formal gray diplomatic coat, moving with the controlled speed of someone who has been patient for as long as patience was the correct strategy and has now correctly identified that the corridor has cleared. Behind her, the single aide who had been at the priority seating the evening before. The senior delegate had the bearing of someone who has spent the night knowing where her daughters were and being constrained from reaching them by the logic of not disturbing what was correctly in order, and who is now moving with the velocity that comes from the release of that constraint. Behind her, keeping pace but slightly to the left, was the Velkith coordinator. He had the third instrument in his hand. He was speaking to her in low, rapid Velsoran that I did not need to understand to recognize as the argument for a filing made to a moving target, the attempt to get a response before she reached the thing she was moving toward. The senior delegate did not slow down. She said something short over her shoulder in Old Velsoran without turning her head. It was not a long statement. The coordinator stopped as if the forward progress had simply ceased to be an option, and stood at the north junction with the third instrument in his hand, and the expression of someone who has encountered a counterposition he was not prepared for, delivered at a speed he was not prepared for. She came around the corner and saw me. She stopped. She looked at me, the welfare manual tucked under my arm, the relay terminal in my hand with the overnight log visible on the screen, the corridor to the East Annex behind me. They went to the East Annex, I said. Corridor clearing was at 5:31. They were walking well. She looked at me for a moment that was longer than the information required. She was Velsoran primary line, the silver pale hair, the deep ash silver skin, the precision of bearing that comes from a house that has used formal register for 10,000 years. She had the eyes of someone performing a final assessment of a completed action. Not a question, more like the last step of a calculation that has been running since 2114 the previous evening and has now reached its conclusion. You filed the counter-registration at 2122, she said. Yes. You read Article 14 first. Yes. Before the coordinator arrived. Yes, I said, I had a few minutes. She looked at the welfare manual. She looked at the relay terminal. She looked at the coordinator, still at the North Junction, who had not moved from where she had stopped him and who was holding the third instrument with the expression of a man who had prepared for 3 attempts and found that the occasion for a third attempt was no longer present. She said, in compact standard, clearly and without raising her voice, in the way you speak when you want a statement to be on the record. The third instrument is filed under which provision? The coordinator said, Article 14 subsection 6, which I have already superseded through the subsection 8 delegation, filed at 2304, acknowledged at 2311, and copied to the Corridor Authority Welfare Board at 2306 as a matter of protocol, I said, in the same clear register. I turned the terminal so the screen faced him. The board reference number is on the screen. He looked at the screen. He looked at the senior delegate. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has just received confirmation of something she did not particularly need confirmed. She said something to him in Old Velsoran. Brief. I had enough trade Velsoran to recognize the formal withdrawal construction, the specific phrase that means this claim is ended here, which is different from the phrase that means I will try again. He looked at the instrument in his hand. He looked at the terminal. He put the instrument back inside his transit coat. He left without speaking further. His remaining specialist left with him. They went down the north approach corridor and I did not see them again. The senior delegate watched them go. Then she turned back to me. My daughters, she said, a statement, not a question. East Annex, I said. The older one had her notebook at 5:31. The younger one had her cloth bag. Something in her face shifted. Not a large movement, it was a trained face, accustomed to moving only when moving was the intended action. But the shift was real. A settling, a release of something that had been held in careful suspension through the night and was now no longer needed. "The door," she said. "I usually leave it open," I said. "The night shift. The corridor alerts come through more clearly with it ajar." "And when you found them?" "I sat down," I said, "and read Article 14. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the welfare manual under my arm. She looked at the relay terminal. She looked at me with those Velsoran eyes, the same amber structure as her daughter's, but carrying in the outer ring the accumulated assessment of considerably more years, and said, in the careful compact standard of someone who has chosen a language other than their own because precision requires it, "I do not have, in Old Velsoran, a formal designation for what you are." I waited. "There is a word," she said, "for a keeper of a door who does not close it, Velsathos. My younger daughter uses it, she gives it carefully." She paused. "But that word describes only the door, not the reading of 12 pages at 2100 hours, not the filing at 2122, not the sitting in the chair until 5:31. She looked at the welfare manual. "The word I am looking for would include all of it." I thought about the stone on the work table next to the relay terminal. I thought about a 6-year-old in a doorway at 5:31 saying Velsathos with the exactness of someone who has decided a word has been earned. "I think," I said, "your younger daughter may already be looking for it." She looked at me. Then she looked down the corridor toward the East Annex. She had daughters to reach. The shuttle bay had opened. "The shuttle boards from Bay 2, I said. She started down the corridor. Then she stopped and turned back one more time. "The stone," she said. "She gave you the Kesaldivar secondary stone." "Yes," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she gave me the formal nod of Velsoran primary line. The full one, not the abbreviated acknowledgement used for routine courtesy, the one that the old dialect glossaries describe as going into the house record. And she went down the corridor toward her daughters. I walked the corridor one last time before the shift ended. East Annex, West Approach, North Junction, Dormitory Wing, back to the keeper's room. At Bay 2, through the transit window, I could see the diplomatic transit group boarding. The older daughter was at the threshold with her notebook open to something she was reading while she waited, holding the page with one hand in the wind of the corridor draft. The younger one was beside her, the cloth bag over one shoulder, watching the shuttle through the bay window with the particular close attention of a child who finds mechanical things interesting and is cataloging the docking sequence. The younger one turned from the window and saw me at the corridor junction. She looked at me for a moment across the length of the East Annex. Then she raised one hand, palm out, and held it there. I raised my hand back. She turned back to the window. The shuttle completed its docking confirmation. The bay doors opened and the boarding light came on. They went through. I went back to the keeper's room. The floor heater was running at medium, the same setting it had been on all night. The corridor mat still held the impression of two small bodies who had spent the night in the warmest patch of floor in the building, in a room with an open door. I sat down in the chair. I picked up the pale gray stone from the Kesaldivar secondary moon and turned it over in my hand. The quartz vein caught the heater's light on the upstroke, white against gray, very straight, taking the most direct route from one edge of the stone to the other. I put it on the work table next to the relay terminal, where I would see it at the start of every night shift. The morning keeper came on at 6. I gave the handover report, noted the welfare custody record in the station log, noted the coordinator's 3 attempted filings and the 3 counterpositions, noted that the corridor had cleared at 5:31 and the diplomatic transit group had boarded and departed. The incoming keeper read through the log entry and said, over his morning tea, "Quiet night." "Mostly," I said. I walked home in the early morning light. The second moon was still above the horizon Kesaldivar secondary, larger than the primary at this point in the corridor month, with the faint blue-white tint of high silicate content visible even from the surface. You could see, if you knew to look, the geological difference between the two moons in the quality of the light each one gave. The secondary moon's light was cooler, cleaner. The primary's was warmer but carried less distance in the corridor atmosphere. The stone is on my work table. It has been there since that morning, and I have not moved it except to pick it up occasionally and look at the vein. The quartz runs very straight through the gray from one edge to the other, which is what happens when a mineral has a long time and good pressure to find its path and follow it without interruption. That is the kind of geology the secondary moon produces. It is good geology to know.